Hi everyone! Welcome to week 6 of English 101. I hope that you are doing well. I'm really excited to see where your SA2 drafts end up. So I'm just going to go over a few things to remember for this week and what you'll need moving forward. So let's go ahead and get started. Assignments for this week are pretty straightforward. You've got some readings to do, but no reflection. So I do recommend, though, do not skip the readings for this week, because the You Writing section specifically has an example of a rhetorical analysis essay that might be helpful to you while you're working on your draft. You do also have your blog post number 2 due on Friday, and then your SA2 draft will be due on Sunday. So you've got a few days to get some ideas down for your draft, and then you'll want to choose a topic for your blog probably soon so that you know what you're going to be writing for Friday. So, a couple ideas to keep in mind while you are writing your draft. So this week we've got some handouts that I think will be helpful to you moving forward. One of them is under your week 6 folder, and then in this handouts for week 6. So if you click here, you'll see that there's a PDF labeled Summary and Response Guidelines. It does say Summer 2020, but ignore that. It's or Spring 2021. I'm still in last year. Anyway, so this is kind of a guide, questions to think about while you're writing your summary and response. So kind of moving from an outline to a draft of a summary, and then ideas to think about in your response. It's a really good handout. I would recommend taking a few minutes to read it. And I'm just going to go over some tips for when you actually do write your summary of the song, poem, piece that you've chosen. So what you'll want to do first in your essay is give an introduction to the piece, some of that background. When was it made? Who's it for? What's its purpose? But then the summary paragraph is where a lot of my students get stuck. So what you'll want to do after you've introduced is start your summary with the title and author of the piece, and then about 1 to 2 sentences that describe what the piece is generally about. So when you're doing this with a song, for example, it can be difficult to generalize out. So I think last week we had talked about the song Same Love by Macklemore. And if I was going to summarize that piece, I want to think about not only what is the author saying about their own experience, so what is Macklemore saying about himself as like a nephew with a gay uncle, but what is he saying about gay rights, about same-sex issues in general, and what is he kind of arguing about those issues. So you want to look at not just the lyrics specifically, but then generalizing out to what does this mean for the audience. Next, after you've introduced it, is describe the main points of the piece. So what do they talk about first, second, last? Just go in order of the piece itself. Usually a rhetorical analysis will reflect the ideas in the same order as the piece you're analyzing. So give 3 to 4 sentences that explain what the argument being made. Make sure that you're using your own words as much as possible. All right, save quotes, lyrics for the actual response. Conclude your summary. A lot of people skip this part because you're like, well, I said what the piece is, I talked about what it talks about, and then now I move on. But each paragraph in your essay also needs its own sort of conclusion sentence, something to wrap up that paragraph and help you transition to the response. So end your summary with something like, why is this useful? Why is it relevant? Give something that sort of sums up the piece you've chosen itself. So if you follow these steps, you're going to end up with a really strong summary. And with your sort of background, introduction, and then summary, often that'll take up your whole first page. The next few pages are going to be your response to the piece. So we'll kind of talk about a few ideas of what you might discuss. After you sort of get to a place where you're going back and revising, some ideas to think about with your summary is, are you repeating too much? Do you use strong verbs like this piece argues or it discusses instead of talks about? Do you give the author's name and the title? And then again, does your summary go in the same order as the piece itself? So it's a good idea to sort of reread this once you've kind of introduced and then summarized. So to start responding, what you'll want to do is visit a part of your you writing that we had last week. So on page 67 to 70, there is actually an example of a rhetorical analysis and some ideas that I want you to think about. So the rhetorical analysis of that reading was a piece. It was quite an older piece, it was from the early 1900s. But what the author does is they discuss sort of the ethos, the pathos, and logos that piece uses. And I like to just bring your attention back to this section of you writing because it has some really good writing that you might yourself emulate. So some ideas to think about. Are you entertaining counter-arguments in your analysis? Are you thinking about what someone else might see in the song or the piece, and are you considering that in your writing? Going back and rereading this, what do you think is the thesis of this rhetorical analysis? And then what are some examples from the piece that the student uses, and are they used well? So I'm not gonna do the reading here on this video, but I encourage you to pause, stop this video, go pull up the you writing that we did last week. We are also going to do some for this week, and look at page 67 through 70. It's a great example, and it's probably similar to what I expect you to do in this essay. All right. Also, revisit your essay outline. What appeals does the piece you've chosen specifically use, and how? Which appeals are used the most, and why? These are the kind of ideas you want to think about when you analyze. So the other two handouts that I have for you all this week in your week 6 folder are on introductions and conclusions. So the introductions handout is really useful in my opinion because it gives you some clear examples of what different things you can use for an introduction. So the instructor who made this piece put Spider-Man on the front because they like to use the metaphor that your introduction is sort of like the beginning of a web with your essay, and that this is what kind of draws you into it, and then the rest of your essay is developing that web. So a couple different ideas here that you can use if you're really struggling with, like, how do I start? And, of course, nobody wants to read 30 essays that all start with, the song I've chosen to talk about is this. That's boring, right? So what you might do before you actually jump into what song you've chosen is start with something a little more interesting. So let's look at an example real quick. This is an introduction from an analysis of Margaret Atwood's poem Siren Song, but it doesn't start that way. So it starts by saying, the radiant porch lights of a quaint New England colonial house illuminate the darkening skies of a brisk fall evening. The family, within the comfort and warmth of their home, prepares to greet visitors for a pleasant, undisturbed dinner. One would assume the light banging of pots and pans as a father adds finishing touches to his delectable masterpieces, and the thrum of vacuums as a mother and her children rush to make their humble abode look presentable are the beginnings of a night full of joy and peaceful socialization. However, unnoticed by the busy family members are the multitudes of insects drawn to the porch lights like beacons in the dark. Unfortunately for the bugs that swarm too close to the lamp's warmth, death is almost certain. In a similar sense, throughout Greek mythology, sailors are known to shipwreck off the coast of an island where dangerous bird-like creatures lure men toward their dominion through captivating but lethal song. So, this introduction is actually from that handout, and it is one where you develop an extended metaphor. These introductions are tough to do, but they're cool in that they start with one idea, and you're like, okay, all right, I got you. I got this idea of these bugs drawn to a flame, and then they're like, ooh, but boom, here is what I'm actually talking about, this story in Greek mythology. So I want to challenge you guys, if you're sort of looking for something new to do with your introductions, use this handout to give you that idea. If you've never heard of what a siren is before, this is actually where the inspiration for mermaids came from. A siren was a creature that from afar looked like a beautiful woman and had a very melodious, sort of sensual voice. And they would sing this sort of captivating song to draw sailors to them. And once they were, within their reach, they would suddenly change visually into this terrifying creature. Pretty crazy, but I think the idea of a moth drawn to a flame is quite interesting and does help you sort of visualize these sirens. So this is just an example of how you might think about an introduction for the piece you've chosen. And I'm going to skip through this next one, although if you want, the PowerPoint has all of these in it. So just ask yourself which of the introductions would be good for your essay too. The other handout is the conclusion. So this is a part that a lot of students struggle with because you've done all this great writing, you've done all this strong analysis throughout your essay, and then you get to the end and you're like, today I've talked about these things. And obviously you want to think about your conclusion in a very similar way to your introduction. What's going to leave your reader with something to think about? So this is where the other handout I have for this week comes in. So this other conclusions handout gives you some strategies, some suggestions, and then examples of different types of conclusions. So what I want you to think about when you're looking at your own conclusion is, why should this be more than just a summary? When I ask students, well, what should your conclusion have? They often say, well, I should summarize my main points, and then I should wrap up what I've talked about. Very true. And if that's how you've been taught, you're not wrong. But at this point, when you get to higher level thinking and writing courses, you want to think about ending in just as much of a punchy way that you began with. So what's something that you can leave your reader thinking about? What might leave a strong or emotional impression? This PowerPoint has a couple of examples that I'm going to skip just for the sake of time. But what you can do is revisit this PowerPoint, look over those examples, they're the same from the handout, and ask yourself, how can I leave my reader with something to think about? Why is this song or this piece important? Why is it relevant? Why is it worth discussing? Kind of answer that question, so what? Now that you've gotten to this place of, here's all this that I've done to discuss my song, and now I want you to tell me why it's important. So these are just some ideas that you want to think about while you're drafting, all right? So use your outline to guide your draft. Consider specifically how you're going to start and how you're going to end, and then the middle often fills itself in. You can use examples, lyrics from the song, all right? And I don't want you to use any other sources but the lyrics themselves, all right? So I want your ideas alongside the piece you're analyzing. Don't forget, ethos, pathos, and logos are strong things to talk about. Revisit the e-writing example for ideas, and if you're really struggling, shoot me an email and I'll see if I can get a student example to send your way, all right? So good luck with drafting Essay 2 this week, and I will talk to you all soon.